There we go.
Hello, everybody. So welcome to the Kerry and Yen show today. We actually wanted to create this live in response actually to some of the fierce and fearless teachers that are in my program. And what I asked them a month ago was, what were some of the vexations that you faced that keep you from, teaching the best quality STEAM that you can teach? And some of those vexations were just like, whoa, this is really interesting. And not only that, what I really find actually pleasantly surprised about, which sounds weird about vexations, is that there's a lot of them that people have in common. So, with that said, if you're facing a lot of these vexations, you're not the only one. What I also invite you to do is, as Kerry and I are talking about some of these vexations, if you've got brilliant ways that you've solved them, please share in the comments as well. We're all about, being inspired by each other. So, really glad that you joined us today. Kerry, you want to say more?
Honestly, I kind of think we should, looking at the amount of questions I know you have, and I also asked some people on my email list. We've got so many. I think honestly, we should just probably dive in. Oh, I should probably introduce myself in case people don't know who I am. Hi, I'm Kerry Tracy. You might know me as Feel Good Teaching through my blog or my TPT shop. I have my master's in design-based learning, and I have been obsessed with STEM challenges, particularly since that program. So that was 2008. So I am all in, pretty much live this stuff, live and breathe it. I'm no longer in the classroom, so I know that the challenges that you are facing right now are some that I have never faced personally, but I am invested heavily in education and professional development. And I also invite anybody, as we're going through our discussion today, I always do this when I talk to teachers. If you have a yeah, but in your head, like if I'm saying something or Yen is saying something and your thought is, yeah, but that's not going to work for me because, please, it's not impolite. Please put that in the comments and let us work through it with you, because our goal today is to have everybody come away with some practical tips that will make your teaching life better and easier.
Yes. So we're going to dive in because, like I said, there are a lot of questions. By the way, my dog is trying to get my attention. So if you hear weird things, she's dropping things. So I apologize in advance. She's being really weird today. Okay. The 30-minute STEM class. We had so many people, right, Kerry, that were like, I only have 30 minutes for STEM and STEAM. How do I do this while ensuring that it's rigorous, that kids are learning deeply and all of that great stuff, especially because Kerry and I have often talked about, well, you need time. You need time for kids to learn. So you want to kick this one off?
Yes. So before we even went live, we were discussing that the time issue is probably something that we need to answer several different ways. So I'm going to start with saying, I don't think 30 minutes is ideal. 30 minutes once a week is difficult to get deep into the scientific analysis. And so just know that, first of all, if I had the perfect world, maybe 30 days today, and I would see my kids tomorrow as well, would be better. But we have to deal with the situation that we have, right? So the first thing that I would say is you have to know what your reason is for doing STEM. What's your why? And the reason that I say you should do that piece first is because there are many benefits, right, that come out of doing all different forms of STEM. And they would be weighted differently depending on the person you ask. So for me personally, and I'm going to ask again what you think too. So for me personally, my why is really focused in on getting students engaged in doing science, getting them to think and be curious and ask questions. And then I want that growth mindset piece where they're learning to develop a relationship with failure that is productive. Those are my top three. But there are more. So, and those are sort of, it's not that I don't think they're important, like standards-based alignment and all of those things too. I do. But for me, they're second tier goals. So I would actually pause here and say, Dr. Yen, what would your reasons be?
I think my biggest why is I strongly believe in those 21st century skills. And actually, Jennifer and I, my business partner, we actually talk about the 5 C's now, not just 4,
What's the fifth?
especially in light of everything that's going on. Is there 5? I don't know. I've
Four?
always seen 4. Yeah, 4 C's, but we're going to call them 5 because the fifth one is we're adding cultural dexterity.
Oh,
So you've got your creativity, your critical thinking, your collaboration, your communication. And I want to add cultural dexterity because we're a global society now, right? And so it's really important to be able to have an awareness for other people's opinions, other people's ways of doing things and knowing. But it's also, it's when to honor it, but also to be able to incorporate and bring that into the work that you're doing as well. This is super important, especially for kids. So those 5 C's are kind of enmeshed in all the standards. And so to me, if we are able to give kids opportunities through STEAM, which is one of the best vehicles to do it, to practice those 5 C's, you're really hitting all the standards transcurricularly. And so that's why, to me, and the other thing is think about those 5 C's. If a kid walks away with strengths in those 5 C's, they can do anything. They can learn anything that they need to for whatever the world brings on to them. So, piggybacking on what Kerry said, when you start a STEAM challenge, my question that I ask is, what skill do you want them to practice? And so even if it's in 30 minutes, perhaps instead of doing all 5 C's, we're going to focus on just one skill. And if you practice just on the skill, then everything else comes, the activity falls into place. Like what Kerry was saying, if it's your why, my why today for practicing the STEAM challenge is I want my kids to collaborate. Okay. Then everything that you do revolves around that collaboration. We're going to practice collaboration for 30 minutes.
right. So this is one of the things that I think, so before we get into that further, the thing that I think is important about defining your whys is so that you can let go of things when you need to, because when you only have 30 minutes, you are going to have to make concessions. There are some things that you're going to have to not give up on, but just know that if collaboration is your key today, then you don't really care with the final product. And you probably never really do with STEAM challenges. The product isn't the point, it's the process. But if your students are having trouble with collaboration, then that's my main goal. That's what we're going to focus on. And so if there are breakdowns in that collaboration, you might stop the challenge before they're done building. You might stop it right where it is and say, you know what, we're going to shift our focus in today. And we're not going to worry about building something. We're going to actually sit down and try to troubleshoot and problem solve as a class. What's going on with our collaboration? What does good collaboration look like? What does it sound like? Now, I have like a little collaboration freebie too, and I'll share the link later, but because it's just a free resource. Because that was a question I was hearing a lot from teachers too, specifically about collaboration. But another thing I would say is you don't need to build every class. Please don't do that. A lot of the people who wrote in said they had back-to-back classes, and maybe if you're doing that and you're managing it and it's not making you like have heart palpitations trying to like turn around and do builds in every class back to back with like 6 or 7 groups of kids that you see a day. If you are doing that and it's working for you, great. Far be it from me to tell you not to do something that's working. For me, I know it wouldn't work. And I don't think you need to do that. Especially if your goals are to dive deeper. One of the common things that happens when people first start doing STEM challenges, myself included, is we put a lot of focus and emphasis on planning and building. And then we don't spend as much time on the back end where the students are actually sharing out about their designs and noticing the patterns in the class's designs and what are the strengths and what are the weaknesses and what materials would have been helpful to have here and what might I do differently next time. All these like pieces where you're actually making meaning out of what you just did often get short shrift. And those are the things we want to make more time for. Now, in 30 minutes, can you do all of it? I don't think so. I think you have a couple different options. You can maybe plan and build in one class and then do some design analysis the next time that you see them. That can be present quite a few challenges too, right? Because now you've got a storage issue if you don't have your own room, and some others. So please feel free to write us what your other ones are.
Yeah.
But I will say one of the things that I do, I used to teach middle school. I taught not kinder. Sorry, I don't know why I said that. Second grade through eighth, in different formats. So I've been departmentalized, but I've never been a specials teacher. But what I used to do when I had multiple groups of kids doing challenges, I rarely had them build on the same day.
Right.
I
Staggering is like a really good trick. And what you may want to do is, if it's a new STEM challenge that you haven't done before, do it with the upper grades too, because I know a lot of you have multiple grade levels that you teach. So you may want to introduce the actual challenge itself and the meat of that in your upper grades staggered, right? So that they're not back to back for you. And then in the lower grades, you may spend more time prepping. Maybe instead of doing the actual build first, they look at those things, they study the objects, they work on certain skills before they get up to the build. And then if your older grades have already built it, your younger grades can look at what the builds are for the older grades as well and get some ideas so that when it's their turn. Kerry, you want to say something about that?
I'm not the biggest fan of having, but it's hard to avoid if you're a specials teacher, to avoid having groups of students see others' designs on a regular basis. I'm not a huge fan of it because for me, but there are use cases for it for sure.
Mhm.
And I also think one thing that is helpful as a teacher is to view this whole thing as iterative for you too, right? As you are going in, it's our tendency to want, especially if you're new to your position, it's a huge tendency because we care so much about what we do to want to sprint and do it like you have this end state vision of what you think this STEM program should look like, and you want to be there now. That can, like, it's like a New Year's resolution, right? Like sometimes we make these like massive New Year's resolutions and we run out of steam like 2 weeks in. So you might want to think about pacing yourself with that too. But my thing with showing students designs first is I've actually found that a lot of times it stunts creativity. They try to replicate what they've seen. And actually, sometimes you get more frustration because rather than approach the problem in a novel way or without any sort of imprint in your mind about, how it should look, if you're trying to replicate something and you can't do it, I noticed more student frustration from that. But like I said, I think there are use cases for it. And actually, one of the suggestions I was going to make is if you have an issue of time and you had one class build, I'm assuming this is an elective teacher right now, you're a special STEM teacher, a group has just built, that class has ended, they are leaving, another class is coming in. I actually think it's not a bad idea to have that class come in. And because one of the things I said my goals were, I want kids to be more curious. I want them to ask questions. I want them to think, right? I want to develop that. So I think a simple activity to do, and this helps you recoup as the teacher too, so that you don't have to like feel like you're running and frenzied all the time, is to actually have the students go around, maybe in teams, to the different designs that they're seeing there and try to either reverse engineer the criteria and constraints list. What were they building? What might have been on the criteria and constraints list here? Why, and then also strengths. And I might pause in the middle there and actually go through after we get their ideas and see how much they can pull out. And if you have young kids, sometimes this is cute. I don't do this as much with older kids, but like, if you have like a little magnifying glass, even if it's not something that really requires looking up close, but there's something that focuses the young kids a little bit to have like the physical object that I'm looking closely at these designs. And even with older, it depends. It depends on your group. Sometimes kids are too cool for that in like the upper grades, but sometimes they actually will get into into that kind of thing. So I might pause in the middle and say, okay, well, what did you think? Like, what was this challenge about? What was the goal? What were the, criteria and constraints that might've been there? Then I might have them go around second round. Which ones are the strongest designs in your opinions? And what are the patterns you notice? I would do all those end state things that we would usually do after they build. You can use other students' designs to do that. And then if you want to keep it going, from there, after they've gone through and noticed the patterns and what are the strengths and what are the weaknesses, Now, why don't you plan? Same challenge. You plan. Next week we'll build. So now they go in. And so this is one of those examples where I don't think it's a bad idea always to see examples that others have done. I would do that some of the time, but I would never want it to be that there's like a group of students who never are the first group who's gone through the build completely without seeing other examples. And part of that for me is that I want people who, when they grow into adults, are not scared off about a novel problem.
Yes.
I know we're going to have a lot of them. And so we're not always able to like do the research and see the things that other people have done to solve the problem. There might be a brand new problem. And I want that to feel natural, like to not have to see an example that somebody else has built before you start attacking the problem. And you might not be successful on the first try. Okay. I'm like, oh, so many ideas. I'm going to pause. Yeah. And you jump in for a minute.
No, it's really good. I just want to go back to some of those things that we talked about too, is if you're really new to a STEM challenge, there's a couple things that you want to take into consideration as you do them. Okay. One is like the different phases. You've got your planning phase. Like, okay, going back to our Fierce and Fierce, we talk about the learning trajectory. You've got a kickoff, a cue, a challenge, a problem or a question that you're asking, right? And then you've got, can you hang on just a second? I don't know if you can hear that, but
I am hearing something. Okay, well, I'm going to pause or I'll fill in. One of the things I was also going to say about space constraints. So if you're having your students plan and build on one class, and then the next week, perhaps is when they're actually going to go in and do the deeper dive analysis, then you're going to have storage concerns, right? So one of the things that I will do, I'm moving off camera to grab something, is I'll add a size constraint so that I know I have room. And my size constraint for whatever the challenge might be is often one of these like plastic shoe boxes that they have to be able to store so that I can stack them along one wall in a room. I've seen recently other people have like a box, like a big box per class, or an IKEA bag per class. And those, and then they just put them wherever they work in their room. But size constraints are huge. And I would also say if you're an elective teacher who is on a cart, asking the teacher if you can like have a bin in their room to store until the next week, I know is tricky with some situations, trickier with some than others. But I would ask if that's, and even if you're like the media center teacher, right? So you're not push-in, but you're in the media center, you might not have space to be storing supplies. That might be a thing to consider as well, is to either ask teachers if you can have them bring their bag or their bin back into the room for the week, or talk to your principal and say like, listen, if you want me to do these deeper, rigorous, more meaningful STEM challenges, I need some kind of storage. Like I need you to help me solve this problems, because it's like quick writes versus the whole writing process. If you only ever have this is something that works with administrators extremely well, because if you have a skeptical administrator or just one that doesn't know much about STEM, comparing it to the writing process has always been helpful for me. So a quick write is great. Get students fluent, getting ready to write without like having to like spend too much energy or effort, right? But if all you ever did with your students was quick writes and you never took them all the way through the writing process, they're not going to turn into gifted writers, right? They're not going to become confident writers. And if you don't take your kids all the way through the engineering design process, which does include multiple iterations, if you never do that, your students aren't going to get the benefit of having gone through that. They're not going to become confident engineers and scientists. In my opinion, it would be a near miracle if you don't actually go through it.
And I would also say too, the STEM is not the content. It's not the build. It's the process and it's the iterations. It's going back and improving upon those iterations. I started talking about how you've got the cue where you set it so that the kids are solving the problem, right? Mm-hmm. Then there's the planning stage of it. What are you going to do? How are you going to approach and attack that problem that your students are looking at? And then at the end, and then you do the researching, right? You do the build, you do the thing that everybody thinks that's STEM, but it's not. It's the process that happens after the build That's the most important piece. We call it the synthesis, evaluation, and recontextualization. That's where the gold is for your kids to learn. So, like what Kerry was saying before, if we only focus on the activity, it's sort of like planting all of the seeds in your vegetable garden, and then you're done and you walk away without ever enjoying the harvest. But the harvest is the most important part, right? It's the and that is the savoring, the cutting the vegetables, the savoring of the flavors, the consumption of the learning. And that piece is why you can take a STEM challenge in a half hour. And what I invite you to do is think about those different stages then, right? I set the stage, I give them planning time, I give them a little bit of build time, and then we have the reflection, like what Kerry was talking about, and things. Those can all be half-hour pieces. So a STEM challenge, I mean, Kerry, push back if I'm wrong. You can take a month for an overall STEM challenge. It sounds like a lot, but the learning is deeper that way.
Yeah. So yes, absolutely. You can split it up over a month. The challenge that you have there, you have a few, right? You
Yep.
continue to have the storage issues, but also the continuity. So it can be difficult for younger students, especially to pull something out for a full month, but it's not impossible. So this is something where it helps a lot if from week to week you stop a little bit early and have students document, maybe using Flipgrid or taking pictures or audio recording or writing, right? If you have time. The writing typically takes longer, and I know we're talking about compressed time periods. So taking a quick video that they can then watch the next week when they come back to refresh their memory is helpful. If you can't do it that way, you can take quick pictures and then put them up when they first come in. What do you remember about last time? What did we do? So you're always going to need those few minutes to refresh memory as well. I typically, what I do would do in this situation with 30 minutes, I would probably most of the time break up challenges. I would try first to do it in two to see if I could do the plan and the build in 1 week and the analysis and the sharing out and the questions that they ask each other. So for me, when a build ends, silent gallery walk first, so everybody can see all the designs up close. Then each group presents 2 or 3 minutes. And when they present, they actually only present for a minute to talk about their design and what they would have done if they had more time, because typically they run out of time. I don't have an issue with that, especially on the first build. I consider the first build more of a proof of concept kind of thing. And so a lot of at the beginning, the kids will like protest, right? When the time goes off, because most of them won't be done. That's okay. That's okay. We're just pausing because I know we're going to do on many, but not all, multiple iterations. So I know they're going to get a second chance. So this is just a pause, really, in their first build. Then they talk for a minute and they take questions from their peers and from me for another 1 or 2 minutes. Then I always give them a written reflection piece, but it doesn't have to be written. But I typically have done it in a written format. And then that's probably where that ends for that. That's probably 30 minutes. You might not even get all the way through the written piece in that. Maybe you only get to the sharing out. So maybe I might go to a third week. And you know what I'm going to do if it doesn't work? I'm going to do it something different. Just be okay with the fact that as you're working this through, some of the stuff you're going to fall flat on your face. Some of it's not going to work. And I always try, and this is hard for me. Some of you who know me, I always talk about myself being a fragile perfect, which is a reference to Angela Duckworth's Grit. I grew up with a very fixed mindset, and I've been really working on that for the last decade, but it's still not natural for me. It's very difficult. I want to be perfect the first time out, and I struggle when I'm not, which is actually another question I hope we get to in a little bit, because somebody asked me that too. That was a big struggle they were having. But I think that one of the things that helps me is like to remember that I'm trying to model for my students what I want them to do when they fall flat on their face.
Right.
It's just like, I thought that would have worked. I wonder why it didn't.
And actually, kids actually appreciate that. You're walking your talk. If you're saying that failing and then teaching them to succeed from that is a good thing, then when it happens to you, like I'll give you an example. Last week we just did a STEM fest, and I was like, all right, this could be really good or this could like be horribly bad. And I'm doing it anyways because I'm going to learn, right?
Right.
And that's the thing. Here's the thing. If you focus on the skill, not the actual build, but the skill that you're trying to get your students to learn, the opportunities that you're wanting them to practice, then going back and saying, all right, guess what? We're doing, and you can even say, listen, everybody, I have never done this challenge before, and we're going to learn this together and we're going to figure it out. Our challenge, and you could pull them in on this, is we only have a half hour to do this.
Yep.
I'm going to need your help. Let's figure this out, right? They're going to be more on board. And then when it falls flat, you're like, that's okay. See, this is part of the tenant, right? Like sometimes steam fails and
Yes.
we're okay with that.
Absolutely.
It's a great example.
I want to pull this in really quickly so that I don't lose track of it. So Margie, I usually do give them a whole second set of materials that for most challenges, that's just brand new. So for example, I was showing this again before. I'm doing a professional development on Friday, and I'm doing a tower challenge. And actually, I can just show you the side of the bin. I'm doing note cards, and I've got them separated out into the groups. The first iteration that the teachers will do is white note cards, and the second is colored. And that just helps me tell the difference and make sure they're not that teachers would do this, but students would, that they aren't using some of the first set of materials on the second, unless I wanted them to do that. That's totally fine too. There's not a solid like one right way. So this is why I want to make sure everybody knows there's so much flexibility, like there is in all of teaching, right? To find things that work really well for you and for your students. And the failure thing is super important.
Yeah.
Also, I want to say that you don't have to do all the heavy lifting.
Yes.
And you shouldn't. And you shouldn't. So not just with like when the students are struggling with an idea for their STEM challenges, I never intervene because it's okay for them to fail. The only time I start to intervene is if it gets to the point where it's not productive struggle anymore. When it's unproductive struggle, when it's just frustration and like crumpling up the paper and like tears. And, I might try to stop it before then. But if I'm seeing most groups are having that sort of like unproductive struggle, we stop. We do a gallery walk to see where are all the groups right now. And we go straight into a class discussion about like, and my goal then is I am modeling unflappable, curious, and just emotion-free, cheerful curiosity is I think the term. And we just go through them like, hey, well, what do we see? What do we notice? What do we think would happen? Do we see anything that looks promising in any of the groups so far? We just go through and we start analyzing it. And I always say this, if you have an epic, I call those epic fails. When you have an epic fail, you have to do that challenge again. It doesn't have to be next week. It doesn't have to be next month even. But what I would do is sit down with the kids and say like, okay, well, what do you think we need in order to be successful here? And it might just be, we need to do some more research. We need to work on our attitude, our growth mindset. We need to like work on staying calm, whatever it is, but I try to have them generate it. I try as much as I can not to do the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
And then when they have come up with their things that they need to do. And so for some young kids, it might even they might not say this obviously, but it might just be they don't have the fine motor skills to do the thing. And so you might know they just need more time to grow. And that's the kind of thing that I would say. Like I would say, we might just need more time to grow. We might need to like practice working with our hands some more and with tools and things like that. So we like make our list and we're like, I'll put it on the calendar. So like, you know what, we're going to work on these things that you said. And then we're going to see this, this challenge again. Let's see, I'm going to put on the schedule for March 15th and I circle it on the calendar. And every now and again between now and March 15th, I'm going to bring it up again just so that they know it didn't go away. Because I'm really always scared of accidentally undermining like the talk that I talk about growth mindset, about trying again, about failure being like part of the process. And if you like sweep it under the rug and be like, oh man, that stunk. That was a bad experience. I'm not doing that again. That's exactly the wrong message that you don't want to be sending,
Because also that's one of the things that we also have to change the script on.
Yeah.
You know, STEAM is an imperfect process. It is a process of doing and redoing. And if you continually, you know, think that, oh, it's got to be perfect, we totally failed, we're going to sweep it under the rug, that actually isn't teaching kids what authentic STEAM is about.
Right.
What I also love is what Kerry said about giving it some time. I mean, and this happens a lot. I used to work in a lab, and I know you have a failed experiment. Sometimes it's not the best thing to pick up the next day. Sometimes you got to walk away.
Yeah.
You know, you got to put it, I call it putting it on the back burner. I call it, you know, letting it slow cook for a while so that everything kind of seeps in. And we do it as adults. And oftentimes we don't give our kids enough of that. And so, you know, and I remember this from a live that you and I did before, Kerry, where you were like, you know what? It's okay to slow the F down.
I actually have that on my list of like notes. So I was like, I want to remember to tell people to slow down.
Because, you know, we can slow down if we're focusing on the process. It's sort of like, you know, how you watch a movie the first time and nothing's soaked in and it was a really good movie. And so you go back and then maybe you may slow down a scene, or you just go to that scene and you watch it again because it was just so good. That's really what you're doing. But the other thing you're doing when that happens, and this is the important piece, this is like Jennifer's always talking about the SEL piece, is you're putting the spotlight on your kids and not the activity.
Yeah.
You know, like when you're like, okay, I want to slow down. Let's look at what you're doing and what you're thinking, you know, and how that is so important to this whole process. Slowing down is listening to what your kids are trying to say and then responding to that. So
I love that. I have, so I actually have the other thing. One of the other things I wrote down too is to try, just do less, but
less
better.
is more. Less
Less
is more.
but better.
Yes, less
So
but
don't
better.
need to build every week. That's fine. You can spread it out. You also don't have to, you know, if you hear something today, like, so like when Yen was saying, spread it out over 4 weeks. And I had a thing in my chest. Like I'm getting really good at noticing my physical reactions to things, right? I had a thing in my chest. It's just like, I'm not sure I can sustain every age level for 4 weeks on the same thing when if I'm only seeing them once a week. I'm not sure I can do that. So there are a couple things. If that appeals to you and you're like, I want to give that a shot, give it a shot. If you're like, I'm not sure that will work, see, okay, what are the most important things I want to focus on? And how can I get that done? Maybe I'm going to try to do what I can in 1 week, but you're never going to, I don't think you're ever going to get to the point where you can do deep analysis in a 30-minute period and build.
Yeah.
I just don't see how it's possible. So then what I would say is try doing some of those other things where you're breaking it up and you still give them an opportunity to do the post design analysis, even if it's not on their designs, where they're doing that deeper level thinking. Like I had described one example earlier, but I wanted to give you a few other ideas for like short period things that you could do to break up. And also because I told you, I don't think you should be building back to back. If you've got, you know, 6 or 7 groups of kids you see in a day, I would never be building like back-to-back classes. It's just too much for me.
Yeah. It is way too much. And also when you're doing that, it's like you're rushed and the kids are going to feel it. There's just something about that.
Yes.
You
It's
know,
so much better to like to sit and do something, even like, so what I might do, some different things I might do other than what I already suggested, just straight observational things, like if you can go outside, what do you see, notice, think, wonder? How many questions can you come up with about this tree? Like the goal is to come up with as many questions as you can. And if you can't go outside, then you just pull up a picture of some phenomena or you know, a still image picture of something and get them trained on like really honing in their senses and seeing. And the reason I say see, notice, think, wonder is because For me, the way they break up in my brain is just seeing, unless you have an eye issue, right? Seeing is just everybody can do that, right? I see a picture on my wall. I see a light over here. I see this. I see blah, blah, blah. The noticing to me is like when I start to pull out patterns, I notice that these lines are all going in the same direction, you know? And think and wonder kind of come together. Like, I think that it matters the size of the base of the tower. I think that different shapes might be stronger than others. I wonder. And so that to me is like the difference between stating it or asking it as a question. You can do that for a half an hour. They're not going to come up with, they'll be tired of asking questions of coming up with that after maybe 5 minutes, unless they're in groups. I would split that up and do 2 or 3 minutes as individuals, then partner them up or group them up and share that out, and then whole class discussion. And then if there's time after that, then maybe they can start researching some of their questions. That's a reasonable thing to do with your 30 minutes. That doesn't take much plan or prep on your part at all. Another thing I might do is pulling up things that serve a similar purpose, right? These are all cutting tools of some kind. I might not do this with every group, depending on safety, right? Because this one, I don't know if you guys know, but this one is pretty, it can be sharp and it's not super safe unless your kids are responsible with using tools. So I wouldn't put this one out with certain groups, but you get the idea. What is the criteria and constraints? How do they change from one to the other? What do you think made somebody create this? What were the problems they were trying to solve with this versus this?
By the way, one of the things that we also want to think about, just as Kerry was saying that, is this is the technology piece. Oftentimes we think technology is, I've got to have robots, I've got to have computers and iPads. But in reality, if we think about what technology truly is, it's about taking what we know, scientific knowledge, and applying it to solving a problem or making our life better. So scissors is technology.
Right.
Pencil is technology. By having kids look at that and think about, why would they create it this way? Why was it built in this way? How are the different function, how is the structure informing the function? Those are such good, deep questions, but it's also technology.
Right. I love that. And actually, since you said that, I want to actually pull out a question that I got submitted, and I will, because I heard you say what I think is an answer to this, but you might want to say it a little bit different. I don't know. So someone wrote that they would like to know the methods for educating middle school kids about what STEM or STEAM is. We get asked. To me, it's using science, technology, engineering, art, and math to solve problems. It's the application of STEM or STEAM to solve problems, is I think the most broad definition. Would you, and you basically, that's basically what you said.
Yeah. And I would also say it's to solve problems, but it's also to answer questions about the natural world.
Love that.
Like sometimes we just want to know, like, that's what a scientific phenomenon is, right? And I am a little aversive to the word phenomenon because there's a double meaning to it.
Okay.
And it scares especially teachers that are not used to being in science.
Okay.
But the other thing is, being in science, I never used the word phenomenon. Okay. When I was my whole major was science, didn't use the word phenomenon. Then I go into education, I'm like, this is weird. Because to me, phenomenon is everyday things that make you wonder. A bubble is a phenomenon. A sneeze is a phenomenon, right? And so to me, I like using learning cue. It's something that
learning cue is easier. Makes a lot more sense. Yeah.
Right. It makes sense. It's something that cues the learning. It cues the observations. It cues the curiosity. It cues the whole process behind solving the problem or finding the answer to a question. And some of those questions are questions that kids are coming up with. So to me, but I would also say one other thing though, when it comes to STEAM, because I like to draw that stake in the ground. It's the reason why I support STEAM over STEM. Two reasons. One is STEAM is also about communicating the science, communicating the technology to others.
So can I tell you why I always say STEM and not STEAM?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So early on, I was trying to decide, am I going to refer to everything that I do as STEM or everything as STEAM or go back and forth? and that I want to pick one and be consistent. And so what I realized is the way that I try to do STEM involves not only art, but often ELA and art. And so for me, then it becomes like stream and
Yeah,
like, and I just thought, you know what, this acronym is going to get out of control. So
it
while
is.
I always find myself explaining it though to people, because they were like, why don't you say STEAM? I'm like, I'm not averse to it, but also I think that sometimes, see, I consider the communication piece. I know you can't see it, but I have my STEM ideals poster on the
Mhm.
wall, asking questions, answering questions, communication, like that's science. To me, it's also ELA. It's everything, right? And then okay, so
Everything.
here's the last thing I'll say on my soapbox on art. I I think sometimes I feel intimidated that I'm not sure that my art connection is as strong as some of my other pieces, because I know some people say, well, you're creating in building anything and creating anything that is art. But then there's part of me that's like, yeah, but is it though? Because it's like, am I looking at the, am I looking at the standards the same way I would with the other strands? And so then to me in my head, I was just like, you know what? I'm going to be old school. I'm going to say STEM, but I'm going to make a strong, honest attempt to pull in all kinds of subject areas as well. And see here, and the
Yep.
A can be
And
art,
what's right?
asking, answering, language arts. See? So anyway, that's why I go with
An
STEM.
application and all of these things, and I totally agree. Yeah. And
Okay.
like I said, we drew it, and I would say, here's the thing, and this is actually, especially teachers in Iowa that are watching this, right? We drew a line in the sand when we called it STEAM, and here's the reason why. Because we wanted people to understand this is different than STEM 1.0, which has been the education. If you look at the body of research in STEM education in the past
Mhm.
versus STEAM education now, there's a line that gets drawn between the two. And I'll explain. That line is almost about inclusivity and communication.
Hmm.
So STEAM 2.0, and this comes from, just background from the state of Iowa, is really about bringing everybody into STEM. It's about including everybody in STEM. How do we do that? We incorporate innovation and creativity. So there's a transcurricular lens, and it opens a whole box of worms. And I'm not going to go over that because that's
Yes,
going to be
we
a
should get
lot
back to
bigger
the
today.
topic.
Yeah,
Okay,
Pandora's
wait.
box. We're going to close it today. But like
I
I
have a
said,
couple other quick ideas too.
yes.
If you're looking to break up your builds, right, and not do back to back. So as I was saying earlier, if you're analyzing other students' designs, so like if they come in and they're analyzing the designs from the group that went before them, if you have them actually write out 3 questions I want to ask this group about their design,
Ooh.
write out the questions, hold on to the questions, give those questions to those groups the next week. You know what? The 5th graders came in after you designed last week, 3rd graders, and they have some questions about your designs, and here they are. And then guess what they do this week? They answer those questions and whatever else, right? So that's one. You could also have them do skills practice. So if you've ever seen those anchor charts of like ways to connect cardboard, and if you haven't done this, look up like cardboard connection anchor chart and do like a Google image search. It'll come up with a bunch. And have them give them cardboard, give them scissors. They don't need much else, but you'll be able to tell on the anchor chart. I think some of them might use tape or like a little connector piece of some kind. But you can have them do that for half an hour. Just make as many of the different connections as they can. It's a simple build that just involves a bucket of cardboard, really, and very little else. Character ed, for me, like STEM ideals, things that I want them to work on, we can do, and research, of course, is one thing, or existing designs. There's a wonderful video on, it's not malaria, is malaria test. What's his name? Mark Rober on YouTube. Like they do this thing where they wanted to
Oh,
figure out like how can they deliver these tests to these remote areas, and it has to be cheap. It can't be like a thing that needs to be refrigerated. When they define out all the things that they need for this malaria test, it sounds impossible, and they managed to do it for like, it's like under 60 cents, it's like 53 cents or something like that. What they came up with is amazing. So even just that, like watching a video like that and discussing it, going back out and defining what the criteria and constraints were and how they solve the problem, that's a simple thing you can do. Focusing on the 4 C's, like having your students say, like, what does it mean? What does good communication look like and sound like? What does good collaboration look like and sound like? Have them make charts or posters or whatever. Real life STEM, I already said. Break up over periods, I said. And rubrics is one of the
yes.
things I wanted to make sure that I said. So if you're having trouble with getting your students to collaborate or to understand working through whatever it is, I use a rubric. And have the students read before they start. This is what we're focusing on today. Notice that it doesn't say the tower has to be like on the rubric. Nowhere does it say what it says on the criteria and constraints list, which is really the vehicle. The design challenge, the building, is the vehicle for delivering all those other goals that you have that are so much more important. So on my criteria and constraints list, it's going to say, yeah, you want to build an index card tower that stands at least 18 inches tall and can hold whatever, a weight at the top or whatever the thing is, right? That's criteria and constraints list. My rubric might really be about the 4 C's. They might have a thing that says, they might have a line that says, like, for communication, here's what a 4 looks like. Here's what a 3, here's a 2 and a 1. And I don't grade them. They self-grade. Every individual student self-grade.
Yes.
And so if that's the 4 C's, if that's what I'm really focused on, and usually at the beginning of the year, I start with the 4 C's. And we do that rubric for maybe a month. It depends on how often you see your kids. Maybe a month. And then the next month, I'm shifting into, now, how are we doing with the process? How are we doing when it comes to planning, when it comes to building, when it comes to, like, I actually define out, what do I expect from them when we're doing the presentations? I expect not just that they're quiet, I expect that they're engaged, that they're asking questions, they're listening, and they're asking questions of their peers that show they're listening and not just waiting for their group's turn to present. So it's whatever my pain points are with my students, whatever's frustrating me about my students, and maybe it's that they give up too easily. So I make a point of having on my chart, on my rubric, that even when things were difficult, they kept trying. That's on there. Not that the tower is 18 inches, but that they continue to try, that they continue to make an effort, that they attempted to meet the criteria and constraints. Attempted, not that they did. So that they understand, because the thing is, our kids come in and they're used to our achievement-oriented culture.
Yes.
And
yes.
it is a sea change for them to come in and understand that it's actually not about the tower. And you need to tell them, like, it has to be explicit, and not just tell them, but like show them in your actions and what you care about and the things that you're discussing. And that when something fails, that you're interested in it. Not like, oh, well, that was a waste. It's just like, oh, well, what an interesting idea. How did you come up with that? Is there something promising here that we might be able to work with, or try on the next iteration? Because this is just something I haven't seen, the kinds of questions and the kinds of attitudes you model and your rubrics, all of these things. It takes time, though, everybody. And especially this year,
Yes.
kids are in a fragile place. We're in a fragile, well, maybe not everybody feels that way, but I personally feel that way in a lot of ways, that just like, it's hard to fail right now because it's hard to take even one more emotion on. And so for me, knowing that that's a big part of my goals, I'm not worried about stopping mid-challenge and focusing in on, like, what do we need?
Yeah.
Like, do we just need a breather? Do we just need a break from building today? Do we need a break from, and really shifting focus into SEL at that point? And isn't it interesting what our brain does, or like what our emotions do sometimes? Because when I get frustrated, when I get mad, I still sometimes cry. I'm an adult. I still sometimes get mad to the point of tears that I can't do a thing I think I should be able to do, and it shuts me down. So if I know that that is a thing that I still struggle with, why would I expect a 6 or 7-year-old to be able to manage that at a high level? They haven't had the practice. That's what this is. This is one of the other things you get to do, right? And it doesn't always feel good in the moment, but for me, that shift is what really changed my my approach. When the students would get frustrated, somebody wrote me and they said that they were really bummed out. So I'm working on STEM challenges to teach my students how to persevere when something gets a little tough. I want them to be creative. I want them to fail, then fix it. But right now, all I'm getting is pouting and no effort. It's defeating me. And I used to feel that. I used to feel that so much. And what I would recommend to this teacher is just take a pause. I do have a blog post on this
Yeah, and this goes back to Wendy's question here. She says, how do you find all the videos and problems? Kerry has a wealth of really good resources, you know, that address some of these issues. Wendy, also in Fierce and Fearless in the Thinkific site, we've got some of those links, and we're actually putting a library together for you too of some of these things as well. So we're going to continue to add on to those, especially with some of the things that we've been talking about today. But just one other thing too is if you're approaching a STEAM challenge from the lens of, I just want kids to build something, a thing, then you're almost kind of missing the point. A STEAM challenge is really about honoring and giving students opportunities to practice the processes behind STEAM, of creating solutions to problems, of working toward those solutions, testing whether or not those solutions work, and then reflecting on it. So when you take a pause, like what, Kerry was saying before, when kids are, frustrated or something fails, and you're like, hang on, I don't want to stop. I want to sit and honor your work. That's what you're really saying when you take a pause like that. I want to hold on for a second and take a breath, because it's not winning. It's not the tower. It's not those things that are important. What I want to know and what I want to learn from is, tell me about the work you put into it. Like, tell me about the process you went through to create this. And then from there, together, let's figure out a way to help one another, right? Who doesn't need to hear that right now? Like, I mean, we all need a little bit of TLC. And I think especially in these challenges, like these STEAM challenges, even giving those kids a moment to pause and appreciate the work around them, the things that they've done, is an important thing. I also just want to share, this is also effective for after school clubs. I used to run an after school club. We had a short amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so breaking some of these things up, but also going with the flow. Like, there were times when, my students came in and I was like, all right, we are definitely not pulling out the sharp scissors today. Let's sit down and work on observations today, or let's, just key in on what we're feeling. And I think in some ways that's a bit of the advantage of being a specials teacher, because you can take some of those pauses usually, to be able to focus on those 21st century skills. And if an administrator goes, well, what are you doing? I thought you were doing X, Y, and Z. That's when you can sit and say, no, today we were really working on collaboration and helping our kids fine tune their collaboration skills. You got a problem with that?
Well, that also ties into another question that I got, which is, the person says, my biggest issue is administrative buy-in. They want data. Oh, so this is a weekly push-in teacher. They want data reports about how STEM activities help my students do better on tests. So I hate that, but I understand that's the reality. So I will say a couple of things on that. First of all, if you go to stemchallenge.com, which is my site, look up if you search on the blog post, search for skeptical principal. There's a whole article on that like I write, like, how do I get admin buy-in, that you might find helpful. Also, I stopped mid-sentence saying that for the other person. If you look up like teaching students how to persevere, that blog post will come up too on that site. Sorry, I don't have the link for you right now. I'll try to go back in and add them later. But for admin, basically in this situation, it's a little tricky. So I had to do this as part of my master's program. I had to actually track my students' test scores versus other classes. And like, that was part of my master's project. So I always had data that I could show people after that said, this is how my class performed versus the rest of the second grade who were not doing this. Of course, we all know there are other factors involved there. because everybody's teaching style is different, blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't matter because what was important is my numbers were higher. So I got to keep doing what I wanted to do. It's a little trickier when you're a push-in, right? Because you're only seeing them probably once a week, and perhaps you're one of these 30-minute teachers. So a couple of things. I would ask what they expect to see specifically, because you're not their regular classroom teacher. So what is it that what data do they really want? They need to define that for you. I would go in though armed, read that article that I told you about, that blog post. I would go in armed with what I know is working and what I know the benefits of a well done STEM program provide. And I would be able to point to at least anecdotal evidence based on the kinds of questions the students ask. Students who think critically and persevere are ones who do well on tests.
Yes.
Not all the time, we know that, but in general, if you build those skills, you're going to build test taking skills too. And I want to say, I will be on the record twice saying, like, I hate having to justify anything using test scores. But again, I know that you have to do that. But I would also use this as a means to try to push back on my short time limit. If you're only seeing your kids 30 minutes once a week, I would say, you know what, this is what I can do with 30 minutes. But if I could get 45 or an hour or even 2 back-to-back days of 30 minutes, the continuity would be stronger. I would lose less time to having to refresh everybody's memory. And that was something I wanted to say earlier too. I usually start by saying, first of all, if you can push back, push back.
Yes.
Probably this year the schedule's set probably for this year, but maybe at the semester you could push back. But even if you can't, one of the things I would do as a specials teacher is go around, if I'm only getting to see my kids once a week, to the other specials teachers and just see if they would prefer, as you would probably prefer, to see your kids 2 days in a row for 30 minutes. So you could actually finish a project or get close to finishing a project. When I grew up, that's the way our specials program, like in my elementary school, I remember that we went to art 2 days in a row, then music, then PE, then tech, and like our computer lab. No, computer lab wasn't as much. Anyway, and then we went back and we repeated the cycle over again. So if you can get buy-in from the other elective teachers and go as a group to the admin and say, like, hey, we'd really like to change the schedule up, everything else can remain the same. It's just that you're going to see kids 2 days in a row instead of waiting a whole week to see them again. Okay, so I'll pause there, but I'll just say they need to define what they want to see, but you should go in armed with what you know you're already doing well. And I gave you some ideas in that blog post.
And then also I would add to, if you use Google Scholar, don't use Google, but use Google Scholar, which is, it's search engine Google created, but for research articles. If you just even Google STEM and test scores, you're going to find a lot of research that backs up this, idea that authentic STEM actually does raise test scores. It makes sense that it would. So there's some research there. I will pull some choice articles, of course. And then I don't know who this person is, but I will say somebody asked, can you send us that website to us? Yes, I can totally do that. So I will put that together in Thinkific for you. But yes, there's research that backs it up so that you can cite papers on this. You can talk about those 21st century skills and preparation. Oftentimes when I dive into things, like I've been on stage where people are like, well, this stuff is like so, squishy, right? It's not hard facts and they're not memorizing and they're not in worksheets. Sometimes I'll turn to them and be like, the stuff that you learned 20 years ago is outdated now. That's the problem with hard facts. What we're trying to do is teach people how to learn.
Yeah.
And that doesn't look like traditional school. If we talk about what do soft skills look like? If you think about your ideal employee, what does that really look like? Do they come in as, a dictionary of knowledge and facts? No. They come in with these skills that you really want to have that are desirable. Well, how do you get that? You get that when you have kids practice process and not only focus on content. We only have a few minutes left. Can we talk real quick about adapting to multiple ages and groups?
We can. Also, I had a couple that I want to talk about, and I don't have a hard out. I don't know if you do.
I don't. Is that okay?
Totally fine.
Oh, this is gonna be recorded if any of you need to, like, leave, so.
You're like, "Oh my gosh, stop talking, lady. Just go ahead and go away. If you need to leave, we understand. You can come back if you wanna catch the rest of it later." Yeah, okay, so good, because I was like, talking fast because I was like, "Oh my god, we're running out of time." Okay, yeah, so multiple age groups. Just about any STEM challenge can be adapted to just about any age group. If you're using okay, so the way that I do STEM challenges, which is really simple materials, and you change the criteria and constraints list based on the age group, right? And that can mean a couple of things. Like, I'm going to give you an example I always use the tower challenge as my basis for this because I think it makes it easy to understand. So index card tower challenge, right? I'm doing this with adults later this week. I've done it with I think kinders. I've done it with kinders through eighth, and I've done this with adults. So what changes? A couple of different things. Your materials might change. With younger kids, for example, I always give them tape, and I'm probably going to give them more tape than I would a third or fourth or fifth grader. If I'm doing this with like even middle school, high school, or adults, maybe I don't even give them tape at all. So that's one adjustment that I can make. I might also change the overall goal. So my goal is always going to be a freestanding tower, but for younger kids, I might say the tower should be freestanding, which means it doesn't lean against anything else. It can stand up all on its own. And you can only use these materials, and we're going to have a time limit. And your tower should be at least 12 inches tall or whatever the thing is, right? But I almost always give them like a base. It should be at least this. And then the rest of it, if I want to even challenge them a little bit more, I might say, and it should be never before seen. That sparks creativity. In older students, that can actually stress them out a little bit, but that doesn't mean I won't give that to them because I don't mind stress testing them. It's a STEM challenge, not a STEM easy. And so like older students, as I'm going up, I might say, build the tallest tower possible. Or I might say, build a tower that's at least 12 inches tall and can balance a pencil on the top. Moving up from there, I might perform it like an obstacle where I've got a table and I put a book. They have to put a book down, and they have to build part of the base of the tower on the table and part of it on the book. So they've got an obstacle that they are incorporating into their design. I might have a river or just like a piece of paper or whatever, and they have to build the base on either side of that and bring it together. I might also include standards. It's always a good idea. If you want to pull in some math standards, for example, I might say your tower should incorporate at least 2 different 3D solids, because I know I want to go in later and have them, maybe do surface area or volume or something like that. So the tower might not even after the fact care how tall it is. We might just want to see which of the towers had the largest volume or surface area or whatever. So there are many ways, just about every challenge you can do tweaks like that, right? It's just about going in and taking a look at what's already there, what's already existing as the criterion constraints, although some, depending on where you're getting your challenges or coming up with them on your own, they might not call it that. But to me, that's the list. It's a criterion constraints list. And you just make those adjustments. Younger kids get more time, older kids get less for their initial build. For me, I'm a person who doesn't use student materials budgets personally, because I found that for me, it was a pain point, and it's not that. And like with younger kids, it's a valuable skill to add and subtract and things like that, right? And like do money, like kinds of problems. But like when we're getting into like 4th and 5th and 6th grade, there are better math connections to be made, in my opinion. But that's not to say budgets are bad. And if you're using them and liking them, keep doing it. I also find that for me, I usually give everybody the same set of materials, just give them all the same set of materials to build, at least on the first build. Now that they have that information, part of the reason budgets were a pain point for me was because they were spending so much time trying to figure out what to buy without knowing, because they hadn't built yet. They didn't have the knowledge of what they should buy. They're kids, and sometimes some kids are better at that than others. So I think like on a first build, it feels almost mean to, like, for me, it wasn't working for my kids or me to do a budget, and it saves time not to, right? Because they just get straight into the build. Everybody's got the same thing. It's fair. Second build, I might consider doing a budget because now they have some experience to apply to making that decision. and it doesn't take as long to do. Another thing I've heard people say, someone actually left this as a response or as an idea on one of my pages. She has them do a reverse budget, which is they build with all the materials, and then after the fact, she shows them the price list, and as they break down their build, they figure out how
Oh
much
my
the
God.
design cost. And then on their second build, their goal is to cut the cost by whatever, depending on your age group. Maybe it's just, oh, cut the cost, but it might just be cut the cost by 30% or more. Cut the cost. Who could cut the cost by the most and still achieve the same height? Yeah. So there are a lot of different ways to address these different standards and make things appropriate for the different age levels. Just like the possibilities are endless. And if you're looking at something and you're not sure how to make that adjustment, I know that there's help between all of Dr. Yen's pages and groups and mine as well. So like if you're like stuck on something, ask.
Ask away. Yeah. And I would also say too, just like on the learning pieces of it, right? Young kids, I think it's particularly important for them to practice those physical skills, hand dexterity. Those are the kinds of things that, it's just getting practice building those things and communicating, right? Like communicating their questions, communicating their frustrations, their
Yeah.
confusions. Like those are really, having them verbalize their thinking is
Yeah.
so powerful at those younger ages. So it could be with your younger kids, you're focusing on questions about, tell me about what you did. Tell me, tell me the process of how you created these things. Tell me what you learned. Explain this to another person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's much more like, really concentrating on those pieces to help them just mentally develop those things a little bit more.
Yeah. And then
Yes, right?
yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say also then, I spoke mostly about like the actual challenge in the build, but then after the fact, you can apply your standards-based lessons based on what they built. So going back to the tower example, I would have younger students, they would be doing measurement, right? They would be doing probably
Mhm.
standard and non-standard measurements. With my older students, they might also be doing measurements, but then they're going to graph that data. And my older students from there are doing mean, median, mode, and range with that data. Beyond that, they might be doing ratios and proportions and all these extensions based on the thing that they built. So look to your standards and always err on the side when you're talking about criterion constraints list, always err on the side of making it too hard, because I know that it can be tempting to be like, I want everybody to be successful on their first try, but one of the most important things that we can get out of STEM challenges is the ability to actually trigger failure on purpose for even our high achievers, and helping them understand, what do you do when that happens? How do you bounce back from that? Because it's one of the cruelest things on earth for kids to get into like college and like career before they face their real, like a real dance with failure. They're completely unprepared for it. And
Mhm.
so it's important to let our students fail early and often. So if you're ever like, I don't know if my kids can do it, try. First of all, you'll be surprised.
Yes.
Most of the time they can. But even if they
Yeah.
can't, then you're like, okay, awesome. This is a chance to pivot into like a lesson on failure. Like, and what do we do? How
Yeah.
do we persevere?
And then following failure too is the self-evaluation piece. And in Fierce and
Yeah.
Fearless, we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But I had an intern who never, ever did a self-evaluation until he started working for me. And he was a junior in college.
Huh.
Right? And so, I think on top of when we say failure, getting over the sting of what that really is, to be able to say, no, listen, you failed. Congratulations. You just did STEAM. Like, you did authentic STEAM. You failed it. And now what's the next part? We evaluate. We
Right.
evaluate and we make better, right? So it's fail and get up again. It's not just, we're going to bury it and we're going to,
Yeah, it's
no,
making it productive.
it's
How do
productive.
we make it
Exactly.
productive?
How do you make it productive? And that self-evaluation is so good with that. Like I talk about the pluses and arrows sheet, right? What went well? What didn't go well?
Right.
Right? Like just basic, really starting to give them some time to reflect.
Yeah. What did you do? What did you try? What did you think would happen? Like, what were you trying to do?
Yes.
Because my kids, a lot of the time, I mean, almost always on the first build, they run out of time to finish what they were doing. They all want more time. They all go, ah, when the timer goes off. What they get used to is eventually they're like, they understand, oh, we're going to get another chance later. So it's fine. So they don't complain as much. But that's always part of their like 1 minute presentation to the class is like, here's our design. Here's, if it's a tower, then they'll tell us the measurement of it. And then they'll say like, this is what we ran out of time to do. Here's what, we would do differently next time. Here's what it was supposed to look like. But then before you all walked over, it fell like at the last second, and just having that just be part of like the narrative, part of the experience and part of what's normal in your class.
Yes.
They get to a point where it doesn't sting as much. There are some who are more fragile than others who take a longer time to get there. But the more that you show them its process, the more they'll trust that. But you should expect them not to trust that at the beginning because they have no reason to. There is like very little, if anything, in most of our lives that really is about process and honoring that failure is normal. We all know that there's a stigma for failure, like everywhere. And, and even just in these questions about like, I have to show how it applies to the test scores, so much achievement focus. Why wouldn't they come in with a little baggage or a lot of baggage? The older they are, the more baggage they have when it comes to that. So expect it. Just don't, expect that it's going to be part of that process. And if you are a fragile perfect, if you were an overachiever, which many teachers were and are, you might need to check your own growth mindset as well. I know, like I said, I still fight. Like when I have an expectation of how things should be. Actually, I would love to ask this next question because it's kind of related.
Yep. I want to share the comment though, the Facebook comment in here.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, I have to pull it in.
There we go. So I love your questions, Kerry. What surprised you and what frustrated you in this challenge? I just started using them and what a learning session as we discuss them. Yes.
I have a standard. Thank you. So I have a standard set of like when I do whole class discussion, I have a set of like 8 questions and 7 of them are always the same. The 8th is always a quote that I want them to sort of analyze and apply to the challenge. And I do that partially because I was usually either a self-contained teacher or when I was in middle school, I was teaching life science and ELA to the same group. So I always like the idea of having them practice analyzing a quote and applying it to something in their lives because it makes them better writers, but also thinkers. But one of my favorite things is asking that question a lot. It's like, what frustrated you? To like show them that's actually expected. Like maybe nothing did. That's awesome. Sometimes like we come out of the gate and it just works and it's great. But that is not normal.
No. So, and coming out of like, the sciences, that's one thing, like when you come out of the sciences, it's almost a miracle it works the first time.
Yes, exactly.
Like, and that's kind of funny because I have to tell you, the first time when I started teaching science, and then especially when I started helping and supporting elementary teachers, it kind of shocked me at this almost air of perfectionism that people have about what science is. Like they put it on this ivory tower and I'm like, no, here's my dirty sneakers that stink of mud. And, like, here's my glue sticks and my, I mean, science is messy. The process is messy. Yeah. But what I really like about it, and I invite you to think about this as you teach, is it's an extremely human process. Embracing like the failures that happen and saying, hey, this is normal. This is not like unusual. This is actually great because you're really truly experiencing authentic STEAM in this way is a really good thing. And it's kind of healthy for your kids.
100%. Okay, so I want to ask this question came from a 1 through 6, grade 1 through 6 STEM teacher. Okay. She wrote, my students are not very good at working in groups. They are not used to working together after being home for 1.5 years and learning on a computer. Each grade seems 2 years behind in reading, writing, group dynamics, and communication. Many of my plans are not working the way they have in the past. So I want to say to this, it's not a normal year.
So your plans
So
aren't going to work like in the past.
they're not going to work the way they have in the past. So going back to what I was saying at the beginning, what we were talking about is knowing what your why is important. But secondly, you called out a couple of things that are specific pain points here: reading and writing, group dynamics, and communication. So what I would say is, no matter what, and everybody, whatever your pain point is, think about what is the one problem that if you could solve, everything else would get easier. So if for you that thing is the group dynamics and the communication, then we stop and focus on that. What kinds of activities can we do to focus on communication? So maybe that's the kind of thing where you do, like, you shove like the simple pictures, and like the students are like back to back trying to describe like what picture, or like under, behind file folders, like trying to describe what you want them to draw. So like go and look for some communication things on collaboration. Like, what does it mean to be a good teammate? How can we practice that? Show them a rubric of what it is you want them to like be doing when they're working on the tower. Because I guarantee you, your kids think the point is to build a tall tower. They don't know the point is to communicate, is to collaborate, and what collaborate really means. Kids don't know what that, half the adults don't know. So we need to actually like define it. If we find that our kids are not doing a thing that we want them to do, it's probably because we haven't taught them what that means.
And how to do it, and how to do it.
So
Yeah,
I
because
would say,
oftentimes, you think, okay, I'm going to collaborate. All I'm going to do is, put this student who I know gets along with this student and put them together, and they're going to collaborate. And like, it's like, you think it's like poof, magic, but that's not how it really works. You got to dissect it. Like, what
yeah,
does it actually mean when you're listening to each other,
right.
and
And
practice
what does
that?
it mean to actually like bring in multiple ideas from multiple people into a
Yes.
project? And you also have to figure out as a teacher, like, where's the breakdown happening? So is it the, you teach like a basic lesson on collaboration and then give another challenge a try and see what happens. Have them self-evaluate based on a rubric. And if you're still seeing trouble, a lot of times with collaboration, what I hear from a lot of teachers is there's like a dominant person in the group and they just steamroll. And so one thing you can do is to actually have students with a low materials challenge, like a card tower, um, have everybody individually build, then bring two of those people together and say, look at your tower, figure out how to build a tower that is like the marriage between, I probably wouldn't use marriage with kids, but you know what I mean? Like a comment, combine your ideas with this person's ideas, build a totally new tower based on that. I did want to say one thing about materials too, because one of the things, the reason we decided to have this little chat is you emailed me a few weeks ago and said somebody was like having a lot of trouble with getting all the materials like kind of managed. And I
Yeah.
saw a few different questions on my sheet as well.
Yes.
And so I would say there are a couple different ways to manage like a lot of materials when you have so many kids. Like some of you have like 700 kids or more. On my sheet, I've got a few people who are like 600, 700. That's a lot. So I would say
Yes.
one thing you
And
can
first
do.
off, bless you,
Yeah.
like, for doing that. That's
Yeah.
incredible.
It's,
I just,
it's a lot. It's a lot. So I would say one thing to do, like the card tower was the particular challenge that she had mentioned. And in that challenge, you have 20 note cards. And, if you're going to do tape, you have 12 to 24 inches of tape, which also, by the way, time saver for tape distribution, tape your rulers for however, just wrap it around how many feet you want them to have. And you can pop it right in the bin. It works really well. But with that, if even 20 cards, this is one of the lower materials challenges. And if that's too much, a couple of things you can do. Don't do cards. Do 3 pieces of paper or 2 or 1. Single piece of paper. Maybe you do tape, maybe you don't. If like what I do, and I'm doing, like when I got this bin together for my challenge for a training I'm doing later, I was counting out cards while I was watching TV because it was an easy thing to do. But you can get real burned out if you've got 700 kids. So again, earlier things we said, don't build back to back so you're not having to like get things ready. What I would do is I would probably prepare one class's cards or use paper the night before if I could. If I'm on top of things, I'll tell you what I do when I'm not on top of things because that happens too. And then when the first group starts building, I might have it, not the next class, they're not building, but the class after them might be. I'm probably getting my cards ready during the first 5 minutes of the build, because I don't bother kids during their plan. They're like 5 minutes of plan and like 5 minutes of build. So I'll have like 10 minutes before I'll start circulating and observing and asking questions. That gives me 10 minutes to count more cards or pieces of paper and get some more things ready. Another thing you could do if you're not on top of things is you could incorporate one of the things I said earlier, like, is you can do lessons that aren't either aren't part of a build, a 4-week plan. So let's say one of the things you do is you're having kids analyze what are the, different, how does the function inform the design and all of, or vice versa. You're having them do that. You could actually set it up where you've got them splitting the class time between doing that for 15 minutes and between getting materials bundled for you. I don't think that's inappropriate when you've got 700 kids. I probably wouldn't want to spend a whole half hour, their whole time with me in that week, bundling, like counting out cards in stacks of 10 for me, but I might be willing to let them do it for 10 or 15. And that's just one of their stations. It's like with that short a period of time, I would do 2 stations, one that's STEM, one that's bundling materials. I might even let them choose the materials. So maybe I know I want my pipe cleaners bundled in groups of 10. I don't even know what for yet. I just know I don't want to have to count pipe cleaners every time I do a challenge when I have 700 kids. So I know I'd like to pick up a bundle of 10. So if you have like this person who wrote you, I believe, had like one day a month where they had a significant planning period, like a 2-hour block or something, I would choose what's my challenge that I'm going to be focusing on, or 2 challenges next month with my kids. I would do the same challenge with all the grade levels. I would only change the criteria and constraints list, which might change some of the materials a little bit, but at least then you can buy in bulk and you can plan in bulk and you can have your kids count things out that need to be counted out ahead of time. And then in general, I will say to that person who was looking at my mega bundle and looking at a bunch of challenges that had like more complicated materials than this, although generally they're all pretty simplified, please know that none of the materials list are like, you need all of these things. Yeah. Almost all of them say like there are a couple things you would want to make sure you have, like if you're doing pumpkin picker, you need something to stand in for pumpkins, but that doesn't have to be candy pumpkins. It can be crumpled up pieces of orange paper. It doesn't have to be expensive and it doesn't have to be exactly what I said. You can make modifications, but if you can get yourself to use that planning period to figure out what are the 1 or 2 challenges I'm going to do next week or next month, how many of these materials do I need? And just in general, put a couple of classes to work. Final idea on that. If you have teachers who need to send kids out, this is a wonderful thing.
Oh,
who need to send kids out, who need like a break from class. Like if you make that known, and I would maybe start with a couple of teachers, not everybody, because it could get out of control. But just like if you have a section, if you're not a push-in, this wouldn't work for push-in. This works if you have a classroom as a specialist teacher. You could even make passes up for them if you want, that they come and they're going to be here for 10 minutes and then you're supposed to send them back to class. And he said, "Oh, Justin, I'm so glad you're here. Could you do me a big, big favor? We're going to be doing a challenge next week. And I need to make sure I give the same amount of materials to every group. Could you get the bins ready? Or could you count out pipe cleaners in groups of 10 and line them up with whatever, another pipe cleaner or whatever." Yeah. Have them do that for 10 minutes. If you start doing that and it starts working, then you can bring a couple more teachers on board. Plus, that makes Justin, who might often be somebody who has behavior issues, develop a relationship with you and behave better for you when he comes to see you because he's your special helper.
And he's probably going to be an expert now. He's going to feel like, oh yeah, I know this challenge. I know what we're doing, right? Yeah. And that puts him as a leadership role. I don't know, depending on your school, PTO is really helpful for some of these things too. They will put together like STEM bags and STEM kits and things like that. So
nice. That's a great idea.
Like utilizing some of the adults. I've had it. I remember I did this extensive baking soda vinegar project. And I was like, I don't even know how much baking soda we're going to need. Can you please bring some in? We're going to need some help. And immediately I got, family and adults who came in and helped out during this one thing. So there's a couple ways to do that where like, if especially like with Kerry's STEM bundle, you're like, okay, I want to do this one this month. I want to do this one next month, and have some of those things ahead of time or ask those questions. Could you please send these in packs of 10 with rubber bands? That would be fantastic.
Yeah. Room parents, and even some of your kids like might
Yes.
want to come in, like might be willing to come in like early, or if they're in the
Oh,
after school
yes.
program, sometimes there's like a little wiggle room there as well where they might, if you want to do, I'm trying to give as many ideas as possible, knowing that some of these are going to be like, you're going to be like, nope, I don't want to see anybody early and I don't want anyone coming late. So hopefully one of these other, options will work for you. But the idea is, the other thing you can do, like, and then I did sometimes, but it's hard if you only got 30 minutes, is I just have I have the bulk, index cards or whatever. And one person from the group or the partner has to come up and count out their 20 cards. But when you only have 30 minutes,
it's harder.
It's hard to do that way. Or when the students are planning, depending on the complexity of your materials, right? So another thing that I'll do sometimes, probably not with a 20 card thing where I have to count that much out. But with some of the other things, I'll have like if there are 4 materials, I've got them all sort of like bulked out on the tables. During their planning, I might be counting things out, or I might just be separating them out, actually getting those things out on the table at that point. They have about 5 minutes to plan in a 30-minute for me before they start building. And then if they're at least organized out as much as you can on your table, then the kids can come up. Like one person from the group needs to come get each thing, make sure you have exactly what you're supposed to have, and then get started building. And then if you're still struggling, then this is another place where I say, don't do all the heavy lifting. Tell your kids, we have a problem. We have to get these materials out, and I just can't figure out how to do it. Can you all put your heads together in teams and come up with some different ideas? Don't feel like you have to solve everything.
Yes.
I mean, like really. And the thing is that if the kids are involved in helping you find the solutions, some of the behavior issues that are also part of this problem sometimes start to resolve. Not everything, and not everything's magic, right? But sometimes just involving them, and we have a problem. Here's the problem. What are some ways we can try solving it? And if the first thing doesn't work, then you go back and you analyze it just the way you would with a challenge, right? Again, this kind of depends on what your why is. But for me, thinking critically, solving problems are big parts of what I'm trying to do. So I don't mind applying it to like other types of problems and like social issues and, growth mindset issues. Like it's all problem solving.
Yes,
Of one form or another. And it all ties together and is beneficial to the other thing. So you improve one area, you improve the others. So I do just want to say, like, just remember, I'm going to say this again a couple of times. It's not a normal year. So just don't expect it to go normally. And just work through it as, really focusing in. What are the kids lacking the most for you that you think, what's the one thing that if I solved, everything gets better? And then just do that iteratively. So if the first thing is they're not handling materials well, then that's what we work on first. If the biggest thing in your mind is they aren't communicating, that's the thing we work on first. They're giving up too easily, that's the thing we work on first, and then keep going from there. And you're probably just not going to get as far as you want to get this year. That's okay. I want you to also think about what you wish you were hearing from your leadership right now that hopefully you're hearing, but you might not be, or your friends or your family. Like, what is it you wish they would say that acknowledged the weirdness of the moment, like actually brought it into light and gave you support? And then think, is any of that applicable to how I could be the leader in my classroom for my kids? So if they're acting out, it's hard because we're all drained, and some of us are more drained than others right now. And so a little thing can really set us off. And so sometimes just trying to remember, what is it I would want? What is the kindness and the compassion and the grace I would want to be shown to me in this moment? And can I try to dig deep and show that to my kids? Because maybe it's just like, you need to stop what we're doing and talk it through. What do you need right now?
Yeah. And that's a really good question to ask them. What do you need right now?
Yeah.
Because sometimes that's just it. Sometimes it's, like I said, if we focus on our students and we focus on the skills,
Yeah.
The rest falls into place. It's not about the build. It's about like having that time to practice. So
Yeah.
Margie says here, let's see if I can. So excited to utilize these ideas and not have challenge after challenge after challenge to prepare for each week. Yes, yes, yes,
Yes.
yes.
Slow down.
Slow down. Give them
Slow
time to
down.
learn. I mean, here's the other thing about the challenge. I just want to, not on everyone, but give your kids a moment to brag about things. Like,
Yeah.
what can you create to share with your family, to share with the community what you just did? Like, that's a huge, I know we've had, I had one Fierce and Fearless teacher who just had her students present some of their research in front of their school board.
Oh, cool.
I know. Can you imagine bringing some of these challenges to the school board and just showing them, hey, listen, this may be an unusual year, but let me show you some of the things that we've been doing. Let the kids show you some of the things that they've been doing. That in itself also can win over administration when they actually see kids standing up, taking the lead, doing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Speaking up about those things. It's so powerful.
Yeah, I love
Parents
that.
will
Or if you had like
never forget that.
even if you had like a just like a class website, or
Yes.
if your school has like a Facebook page that they would, you might not, there might be student privacy issues there, but you might be able to post a picture of their design, but not them in it, where they
Yes.
might be able to, type. They could even, tell you what they want, like to be the post or whatever. Maybe I don't know if they have access to do that, but that might be a way to brag to the greater community as well. That could be fun. I just want to warn you. I have two more that I definitely want to say something about on
Okay.
my sheet. Okay,
Let's
I can do
go.
them fast though. I can do this one fast. So this one came from she's a media specialist, and she's doing both STEM and STEM makerspace and like media, right?
Okay.
So she wrote, her issue is, or her big problem with STEM right now is there's no curriculum or sequence, no guidance, no shared vision on what the program is, STEM or maker. She sees K through 5, 620 kids, one time a week for 55 minutes, and the kids lack the ability to work in a group. So first I would say, I know there's some stress in not having a curriculum or a sequence laid out for you. I kind of like that. Those are so much
Yes.
freedom in it. You
I
can
was
make
going
it
to
what
say,
you want it to be. So I would say
you define it.
yeah, you define it. So I think you get to decide if it's not laid out for you, you get to decide what you want it to be. My recommendation, first of all, 55 minutes is actually really pretty solid,
Pretty
right?
good.
So with what I would suggest starting out with is tying, a read aloud to what you're, if you want to do a build or you want to have them go into a makerspace. Again, I wouldn't do back-to-back builds with any of your classes, but if you're doing a tower, two tall houses, two tall houses is good. There are a couple great picture books with Watts Towers that are also great. And The World Is Not a Rectangle. I'm sure there are a ton of other ones, but those are the ones that come to mind immediately. You can have the students define based on what's the problem that's happening in this book. If I built a car, is a great lead in TikTok banner. Anything's on my wall could be used. But I would probably tie it in to make it feel probably more natural for you, because I'm guessing you were probably a media specialist first and somebody said, now you're also STEM, because that's kind of not too uncommon. And I would start small and build up. Don't try to go out at a full sprint. Just like pull in, what do you want? What are your whys for doing STEM? What are your whys for doing media? Your biggest problem, it seems like, because this is what you wrote, kids lack the ability to work in a group. So I would work a lot on team building and what collaboration means, all the things that we've kind of said a little bit earlier too, but I wanted to actually pull this out because you specifically talked about not having a curriculum. I don't think you need one. I mean, I think you will develop it over time, and just don't expect that you're going to have, an end-to-end, like you're going to build on it every year. So start where you're comfortable and add in pieces and see how it goes and take it from there. And then the other one that I wanted to make sure that I said.
And then hold on. So when you say build up, though, that's the other thing. A lot of times we dive into these challenges, and then of course, if they're not working together and things like that, then things happen. You can step it up. So maybe the first time you start with a very small group project. Like, one thing I really like to do are mystery bags. You put bags and things, you have them develop like specific skills. And they don't have to be challenges yet. It's just, today we're going to practice our skills of observation.
Okay.
and inference, right? Tomorrow, let's take a look at this book, but let's, not read the book, look at the pictures and figure out what the story is about.
I
So
like
there's
that.
just, you know what I mean? So you're doing things, but you're leaving out certain information. So it's not so much right into the challenge yet,
Yep.
although you may want a challenge at the end, but it could be your first 55 minutes is let's work on questions today, and different ways of attacking questions and things like that.
And
The
some
other,
team building would be appropriate if your kids are
yeah,
having trouble working together. Yeah, I love it.
absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Absolutely. And here somebody says here students need to have relationships with each other to help with working together. And that's it. Some of these relationship things, I know I'm going to plug this, but that's okay.
good.
Jennifer's work with culturally responsive minds is a whole entire curriculum that works on those interpersonal skills and that awareness. So there's a bunch of exercises from there. Our fierce and fearless people, that's coming to you. So I'm just letting you know. The other thing is passive steam. And we didn't get to talk about this, but I do want to share that a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know what you mean.
Passive steam is putting things together, objects, boxes. We call them loose parts play is another way of doing passive steam, and putting it aside to let kids tinker. Maybe it's
Right.
slightly guided, right? Like for instance, you may just have, it's like Legos. Legos is passive steam, by the way, where kids are just in there, they're building the blocks and then they get to do it.
Yeah.
Maybe another passive steam is like one of those games. I'm really big into those games where, you change there's a laser one where the goal is you change, like you have a series of mirrors and glasses and stuff, and it changes the
Well,
pathway of the, things like
yeah.
that. Those are really great passive steam things, having those games aside.
Yeah. Anything like logic and reasoning types of puzzles and games, all of that stuff is great.
Yeah,
I
and
love
it
that.
doesn't take a lot
Little
from
baby steps.
right,
Make it
exactly.
manageable. Make it I love that. That's okay, no, I lied. There's one other somebody said they were having trouble learning all the names of their kids because they're, especially because they're wearing masks and they have like
Yeah.
600 of them and they're seeing them once a week. So I would present that to your every single class as a challenge, every single class as a challenge that they come up with some solutions for helping making themselves recognizable. Might be something like I could see them creating maybe like a Bitmoji of themselves with their name, or like a name thing that they could wear when they're with you, or what. I wouldn't even define it. I would just be like, I want to call you by your name and I don't recognize everybody and it's hard for me to learn names when I don't see you as often. So like, what are some ways, or even you say like, how do you connect? This is really a question. How do you connect?
God, I love that.
So how
Yeah.
do we connect? How do we connect? How would we feel more like a family or a group when we're here? Like what would we need to do? So don't do the heavy lifting, have your kids do it. Somebody's going to come up with an idea that gives you at least a spark of
Mhm.
something else. And also, if nothing else, it communicates to them that you care about knowing their names and about creating a community. And sometimes that goes a really long way. Just that piece, even if you don't know their name yet. It's hard to learn that many names and when they're wearing masks.
And
Um,
if you're letting them figure out the solution, you're
mhm,
giving them a voice. They get to
absolutely.
express their name, their person, in the way that they feel is best. That's pretty cool.
Cool.
I love that idea.
And then last one on my list is budget stuff, just money.
Ooh, yes.
So not having a lot of money, they've been using a lot of like cardboard because Walmart just gives it to them for
Mhm.
free. But they said in the duct tape costs money. I don't use duct tape. I get rolls of masking tape from Dollar Tree because that's how I roll. And I never give the roll of tape. Never give the roll of tape. Never. They will somehow use it in like one class period. So I always limit. So that's my first thing. If you're on a budget and if you have that many kids, you definitely on a budget, limit the materials that you give out. Some people do that with budgets. I, again, usually just pre-measure what I want them to use. Ask for donations from your PTA. If you are a classroom teacher, you can ask from your parents as well. I used to set up an Amazon wish list and just make sure they saw that at the beginning, first challenge of the year. I sent home a letter. Hey, when you're at home and you're telling your parents tonight about this awesome, amazing thing we did today, make sure they see this note that has the Amazon link. And and buy things in bulk when you have to buy. And I'm going to tell you, I know Yen will have another couple of ideas too. here for you. And they ask about that too. But I tend to choose things that I know will be cheap for me to do. And the things that I have to buy, I can buy. Like I buy my pipe cleaners from Amazon because I get a box of like 1,000 for like $20. And that lasts me a good long time, usually. I would also consider having students break down designs at the end and reuse the material that can be reused. Ask for clean trash. Gather your own clean trash. Cereal boxes are not trash. Tissue boxes are not trash. I use address labels for tape sometimes, but outdated ones. Business cards come in really handy too. Like a lot of times people like offices, you could just ask like offices, do y'all have next time you go to the doctor or the dentist, you don't even need to make a special trip somewhere. Just say like, hey, I know this is a weird question, but
old magazines are great for that too.
Do y'all have any old magazines or old business cards or whatever? Like I'm a teacher and we can use that stuff. So if you have any, when you're checking in, you ask. And when you're leaving, sometimes they have some goodies for you. You never know. Okay, now I know you have some good tips on what do you do? You don't have to spend your own money because it's ridiculous that we all have to spend our own money.
Yes, I don't believe in that. One of the things I would suggest is if you know exactly what you're doing, like what your challenge is going to be, go to businesses and ask for it. Tell them, I would love it if you would be able to sponsor this. I will let, the school know. I'll tell people that you are a sponsor for some of these things, but, we have a budget of so much. We'd be teaching 600 students. This is how much it costs. Would you be able to do that? And you would be surprised. I just saw our local sub shop just donated $7,000 to their local Boys and Girls Club. So businesses, and I had this conversation with my accountant actually the other day. She was like, yeah, my sister-in-law, just is a teacher, and she just asked everybody if they could donate like $2 for the STEM thing. And I was like, why not just ask a business to donate $50? And she looks at me, she's like, if she had asked me that, I would have totally done it. So don't ask small, ask big.
That goes counter to like everything teachers we're so used to getting like so little.
Yes,
that it, like,
and that's the problem.
Yeah.
Because what you have to do is, this goes back to what Kerry said, and this is actually the reason I always remind people, think about your why and share that why with other people. The reason why we're doing this is because we want our students to be involved in STEAM, and we want them to experience engineering and technology and all these wonderful things.
And when you're talking to businesses, pulling in those 21st century skills, because that's what they want their workers to know and be able to do.
And they want the name. We would love to have this, and we would love to have a special thing. Tell your principal that it's going to show up on the newsletter. Big thanks to, this organization for funding this week's STEM, right? If it's a really fun thing, you can even have your local paper cover it. They're always looking for really great local news.
Yeah.
And
the bigger your ask, the bigger you want to make a deal about like how you're going to thank them or how they're going to be like featured in things. Mm-hmm. And I would say I know I've told you this before, Yen, that sometimes I'm feeling like overwhelmed, and the idea of like, oh my gosh, arranging all of that, it feels like something like, okay, that might be a project I can start thinking about when there's a big break, like maybe Christmas break or maybe like summer, and be prepared for next year. But even if it doesn't feel overwhelming, definitely go for that. You can also always try to do like donors choose and things like that. But also you can start really small. Like my dad used to do junior achievement, and he used to go to the grocery store and just like, he'd pick up like 3 bags of like candy that he wanted to like give out just as like little treats while he was teaching. And he would like go and ask to talk to a manager. And I'm like, why are you just not buying these 3 bags of candy? You're like, no, I'm not. This is for teaching. I'm not buying it. He's like, I'm not going to buy this. And he would go and ask the manager and tell him, I'm doing junior achievement and blah, blah, blah. And it would take like 2 minutes. And he would they just comp him and give him 3 bags of candy or 4 bags of candy. So you might be surprised at what people are willing to give.
Yes. And even community Facebook. Oh my goodness. If you're, in your local community, like I have my Ames community Facebook, and sometimes I'm like, hey, I'm looking for such and such, and this is for our students. Would you be able to help? There's so many people out there. And I have to tell you, especially now, where everything is so unusual, we want to do good. We want to find opportunities to be useful and to be able to help. And, what better way to help than to excite kids' minds and to help them get engaged, right? So you're in a way, it's not me going and begging. I want that to be clear.
Right.
You're coming in saying, "Hey, I'm giving you a great opportunity to do something good for the community." That's what you really are doing.
Yeah.
I know that you are probably, wanting to help somehow. Here's a really great way that you can help us. And that's going to help everybody. And they want that right now. Everybody does. I really, just like asking for parent volunteers, asking for these things, you would be really surprised. So many Facebooks like PTO, PIE, Community Foundation, United Way. There's different organizations that you can just write to. And here's the thing about it, okay? Yes, you have to stretch and grow into this. It took me a while. I had a mentor that kicked me to be able to do these things. But that's the reason why I was able to get $10,000 from a company to fund my program in biotechnology. If I can get 10,000, you can get 50. And that's 50 that's not in your pocket.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
And my general thing always was, just because I didn't always plan far enough ahead to like ask other people. I just didn't have time, right? So by the time I was like ready to do something, it was like, I need that's ready in like 1 or 2 days. So
Right.
I left myself no choice but to have to gather the stuff myself, which is part of the reason just about all of my challenges are really simple, straightforward stuff that most of it you already have lying around, because it's like, it's like paper or cardboard or things that you would already I always had pipe cleaners because I think they're so versatile. And I like to have a lot of malleable materials. So I always knew I was going to have a ton of foil sheets because that's probably going to come in handy in multiple challenges. So I would have like my basics, and then some challenges are special and they're going to require a trip, but rarely to anywhere other than Dollar Tree. Like sometimes I would actually develop a challenge based on something I found at Dollar Tree. I was like, this is neat. I have no idea how we're going to use it. Well, I'm going to buy it because I'm going to make a challenge that we have to use, like that this material will be great for. So
And
I
you
think
can ask for gift cards for that.
for
Like,
sure.
right? Like, you can say,
And
hey,
even Dollar Tree might give you some of this stuff if you
yes,
tell them what it's for. And they do have a teacher discount, I think, even. I think you just have to show your ID.
I just ask,
Yeah.
that's the thing is you would be surprised at how often I had one teacher that came to me and she's like, yeah, I think it was either Target or Walmart. And she was, back to school shopping. And when she said she was a teacher, they came out with like 2 giant bags of, kids' scissors for her.
Wow.
Like they had them aside. So, it's just, like I said, people are looking for opportunities to do good. They really are. And maybe you're right. Like if you're a last minute, shopper, I tend to be this too.
Last minute planner.
Yeah. Ask for a gift card for one of those things, like, hey, Dollar Tree, we go there all the time. So.
And my students would know that, like for Christmas, and not that kids you should expect
Yes.
it or anything, but for Christmas, sometimes like my kids, it would be adorable. Like they would go and like, they always have pipe cleaners at Dollar Tree. So like they would like buy a thing of pipe cleaners and like wrap it up. And I would make the biggest production when I would like open up, pipe cleaners for the class. It's so exciting. And so, I just think there are a lot of different ways to go about, not just about making things easier for yourself on your pocketbook and your mental energy and your emotional energy, and just keep challenging your own assumptions about how things have to be or how things should be.
Yes.
How things
Letting
are
go
is
of
how
the
they are.
perfection. Like
Yeah.
it's, especially with STEM challenges, they're imperfectly perfect. That's
Yeah.
the thing. The imperfections of them is actually the beauty of it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You're welcome, Katie.
Oh, yes. And thank you, Kerry, for like doing this with me. I hope this was really helpful. But the other thing too, if we didn't answer your questions, send us an email We're both extremely accessible people. Kerry's probably like, yeah, stop that.
No, no.
But we are. And
Or
also,
honestly, like if I know some people like to do like to reach out in person because maybe they don't want their issue to be seen publicly. But if that's not an issue for you, I would also encourage you to just comment on the thread where you're watching this, because then we'll both see it.
yep.
And whatever our answer ends up being, everybody will see that too and benefit from it. So I would say if you don't need it to be private, I would love for you to comment on the thread. But if you do, just reach out via email, because I know some people
And I
don't
was
like
going
their
to say
business
too,
out there.
you've got our groups. So,
Yeah.
you know, our rebels group and stuff like that. So like you may come across a challenge and be like, I don't know how to adjust this. I don't know how to make this a little bit cheaper. Like send it out, ask a question, because I will have to tell you, when it comes to creativity and things like that, I can't speak for myself. The collective, the seniors, that's where it's at. And a lot
Absolutely.
of people will give you those ideas. So, you know, use them, because that can be a huge resource for you too.
100%. All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. All right. Well, let me take us out of the broadcast. Thank you.
Okay, happy steaming.